Hey everyone, God bless you. Thanks a lot for tuning in and good strength as we come to the end of the second week of the Great Fast. I have a reflection for you I'm entitling Pleasures. And the subject of pleasures and their place in our lives in Great Lent is common in the minds of struggling Christians trying to make the most of Lent. I want to start with a question posed to you, and the question is this. Is Lent about rejecting all pleasures? Is that the purpose of Lent? Well, let me read to you a text from this last Tuesday's Orthros service that will explain the church's mind. The fast, which is set forth as a mystical table, doth bid us to take our fill in unhindered abundance. Do you hear this language? I thought we were giving up eating. I thought we were scaling back. I thought we were practicing temperance and moderation. That's not what this text says. The fast is set forth as a mystical table. It is itself an incredible spread, and it bids us to take our fill in unhindered abundance. Let us eat from this table, the Spirit's gifts ever living as our food. Let us take for our drinking divinely flowing and ceaseless streams of tears. And making merry, let us offer God the song of praise unending. You see here the incredible witness. Dear ones, Lent is not about discouragement and sour looks and pain. There may be discomfort, of course. Any aggressive approach to Lent is going to, in some way, persecute the flesh, and we are very spoiled people. So there will be rebellion against such discipline. But the real focus is that we stop looking at a certain type of pleasure as the really important kind, and instead we gaze upon what is really pleasure. There's a mystical table that we can approach if we step back a little bit from the earthly carnal table. There is a fill. There is an unhindered abundance. There is an eating that is greater than the eating of animal products. We should feast from this table. We should eat the Spirit's gifts as ever-living food. We should take the divinely flowing and ceaseless drink of tears and make merry in our souls for our accomplishments and for what God in His mercy is giving to us. That is the witness of the church. Just think of that incredible text in the 4th chapter of St. John's Gospel, when our Savior is exhausted and hungry, and all of His disciples are hungry, and He sends them away to get food. In the meantime, He engages in compassionate ministry. He interacts with St. Photini, the Samaritan woman. He speaks words of life to her. He helps her come to an acceptance of her sins, the knowledge of the love of God in her life. And when the disciples come back, they offer Him food, and He says, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. They were only thinking of the earthly. They were only thinking of what's tangible. They were missing a truly nourishing reality, which is doing the will of God. He says, my food, our Savior says, my food is to do the will of Him who sent me and to accomplish His work. I suspect that you've experienced this too. Maybe you're hungry, but you get diverted into a beautiful task. You start doing something that is purely Christian, truly from love and selflessness, and you forget your hunger and you feel completely satisfied in the doing of it. Yes, it's called the grace of God. It's called the grace of God. It's called spiritual food. Now, let me think with you a little bit more about pleasures. St. John the Damascene, in his famous text on the Orthodox faith, in Book 2, in what's now recorded as the 13th chapter, he has a little section, a little explanation of pleasure. And I want you to hear this so that you can get a good grasp of the Orthodox mind about what we think about pleasures. He says, some pleasures are of the soul, while others are of the body. Of the soul are all those which belong to the soul alone, as distinct from the body, such as those coming from learning and from contemplation. Bodily pleasures are those which are shared by the soul and the body, and for this reason, all those coming from eating, sexual intercourse, and the like are called bodily. He continues, of the pleasures shared by the body, some are both natural and necessary. Without these, it would be impossible to live. such as food eaten to supply of deficiency and necessary clothes. Still others are natural but not necessary, such as natural and legitimate sexual relations. And he continues, he who lives according to God must seek those pleasures which are both necessary and natural, while those which are natural but not necessary he must relegate to second place and only indulge in them as permitted by the suitability of time, manner, and moderation. The others, however, those which are neither natural nor necessary, must be absolutely rejected. Such pleasures may be considered to be good as do not involve pain, cause remorse, do any damage, exceed the limits of moderation, distract us for long from good works, or enslave us. What a text from St. John of Damascus. And notice how he describes pleasures. First, he makes a division between the pleasures of the soul and the pleasures of the body. Are we to fast from pleasures of the soul in Great Lent? I think not. Instead, we enthrone the pleasures of the soul at the supreme height to which they belong. Then he divides the pleasures of the body into three sections. Pleasures of the body which are natural and necessary, like eating. Pleasures of the body which are natural but not necessary, like legitimate and natural sexual relations. Notice he qualifies sexual relations with those two words, legitimate and natural. And then the third are unnatural pleasures, such as gluttony, lust, sexual deviance. There's a certain bodily pleasure involved in these, but it's completely and totally illegitimate. These are the so-called passing pleasures of sin that St. Paul describes in Hebrews 11 when he says that the great God-seer and prophet Moses refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and he gave up, set aside the passing pleasures of sin associated with Egypt in order to be numbered with the people of God and to share the reproach of Christ, which is far more valuable, to bear his cross before the cross. This is St. John of Damascus, and this is the right way to think about pleasures. What we're trying to do in Lent is order our pleasures. First, we're trying to keep the most important pleasures of the soul at the top. And this is what we were being called to indulge in and to feast upon greatly in the hymnody that I read you at the beginning of this reflection from the Orthros of this last Tuesday. We order our pleasures by keeping the pleasures of the soul supreme. Then we regulate natural pleasures to their proper place in Lent. We make sure that those natural and necessary bodily pleasures are being exercised correctly, that we're eating for sustenance during Lent, not for excess and luxury. We try to take the natural but not necessary pleasures, such as legitimate sexual intercourse, and we control them. Lent is one of those times we make sure that these pleasures, which are legitimate, if they're engaged in properly, he says, according to time and moderation, we make sure that they really are under the direction of our souls, such that we indulge in them in moderation. And so this is, we find this out by disciplining ourselves from these pleasures during Lent and deciding that we're not going to indulge in them. And then lastly, we regulate our pleasures, we order our pleasures in this great fast by despising those pleasures which are neither natural nor necessary and are in fact always sinful, like gluttony and lust and vengeance and these types of things, which have no relevance whatsoever in the Christian's life. This is a reflection, dear ones, for you about pleasures. And may God send his Spirit upon us so that we might be mature believers who have the right disposition, the right ordering of the pleasures in our life. God be with you.
And now, in what the researchers are calling the first study of its kind, Sinclair and his team are able to age the mice and then make them younger again. In this video shared by Harvard, these mice are the same age, yet one is visibly older. How did they do it? By literally breaking up the DNA, forcing the body to repair itself, which he says accelerates aging.
The mice actually do not just look old, but they literally are old.
population. Covered how cells can be reprogrammed to be stem cells, which then can develop into cells of any type in the body. Using this method, Sinclair showed me how his team is trying to study memory loss by turning skin cells into tiny brains.
Here they are, these little beauties. So these are mini human brains. We've pulled up by about 50%. Great skin. They're old.
The results were shared at a conference earlier this year and are under review for publication. Covered how cells can be reprogrammed to be stem cells, which then can develop into cells of any type in the body. Using this method, Sinclair showed me how his